Shalom, shalom, Israel. Can everybody hear me all right before we get started with tonight's class? If I can get a one in the chat, make sure y'all can hear me all right. All right, the water. All right, we are the School of Israel, Slovakia. We are the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, started on 1 West 125th Street under Commanding General Yohana. We are not associated with any, Slovakia, we are not affiliated with any other Israelite group or any other Christian group. I want to say Shalom, Yahweh Shem Yahweh to the brothers, Yahweh Shema, Alathan Bashem Yahweh to the sisters. Tonight is the history class, the Virginia history class, and we are going to do a little bit of catch up from last week. Very slight catch up. But as you all can see, we have a different title for this week. Last week we were talking about America's original sin, and we went over how our First Nation brothers and sisters were the first um, nation to be oppressed the way they were by this kingdom. And then it rolled over to so-called Judites, so-called blacks later. And just want to make sure we keep that in mind because oftentimes these fake Israelite groups talk about how is that Israel is just so-called black folks. That is absolutely wrong. So we got into some of that last week. Um, we're going to get into um, some of the topics about the First Nation brothers, but we're going to be talking about our First Nation brothers, but it's different topics this week. All right. So we're going to give some shout outs real quick. All right, we got Officer Yagadar in the building. Shalom, brother. Trooper Shamaga Bar in the building. Shalom. All right. Who else? Let's see. We got my Rib in the building. All right. And we got Miss Coco in the building. All right. Shalom. Shalom to y'all. All right. As you all can see the title, Esau is the biggest warmonger on the planet. Um, Wanted to get y'all's perspective, right? We love the participation to get y'all chiming in. What are some wars? Not so much. No, I'm not gonna get into that. What are some wars? Because Esau loves his wars. There's almost nothing better from Esau's perspective than a real good war. Um, Obviously, we have some of these current conflicts going on over in the Middle East or whatever. But what are some other wars? Like there's been a fair amount of them. So this country's only it's less than 250 years old, and there have been a fair amount of wars. So who can give me some wars that Esau has been in? 1 second. All right, so all right, my rib said the Gulf War. That is absolutely true. What are some more? There's a good amount of them. And they're not all just military wars. Esau's government likes to declare war on uh, movements, if you will. Who can give me some of those also? All right. Ready to the war on drugs? That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. War on crime? That is also true. Obviously, Yagadah said the war on drugs also. Absolutely. Come. All lives matter. Not sure what you mean by that, sis. The war on all lives matter. Just want to make sure I'm with you. Expound on that a little bit more for me. So yeah, in addition to the military wars, they declare war on these movements: the war on drugs, the war on crime. What else? Um, the war on terrorism. Right now, were these wars are these wars historically successful or not? Matter of fact, Khan, if you think the wars are successful, La if you think they are not. Because Esau loves to declare war on something. There you go. Khan, obviously, I said American Indian Wars. Absolutely. Obviously, Yagadah, Mexican Border War. Absolutely. There you go. There has been a ton of them. Sister Ra'ai said, they have not been successful typically. Little race war, Cuba. Not sure what you mean by that. I might not be familiar with that one, brother. Help me out. What's that one? See if I can pull this up. All right. You have Banana Nicaragua Wars. All right. So this is what I'm gonna pull up, right? Let's see if I can find it. What am I doing? There we go. Okay, Con. Little Race War 1912, part of Banana Wars. Con. So that's gonna get. I'm gonna get into that to that good point in a second. Obviously, I can, right. Occupation. Ah, rolling with them. Occupation of Veracruz. Occupation of Haiti. Absolutely. Now these are all wars. The ones that Officer Yagadar bringing up are technically. I don't think they're considered to be quote unquote American wars, but they're all wars that America was involved in. All right, because that's what else this country does. That's what else this government does. It will involve itself any and everywhere on the planet, right? So just for as far as quote unquote American wars, though, and we're gonna get into that in a second too, though. So you have, let me see. Obviously, you got the Revolutionary War. And let me know if y'all can see this. Okay, got the Revolutionary War. Got the War of 1812. Now it says the Indian Wars. We're gonna come back to that. The Mexican War, Civil War, Spanish American War, World War One, World War Two. And you got the Korean War, Vietnam War, Desert Shield or Desert Storm. That's the Gulf War. All right. And then you got the Global War on Terror, which is the current war that's been going on now for about 22 years, almost 22 years that this has been going on. And these are just the wars that this government recognizes that really they either initiated or was the direct one of the primary combatants in. Now, most of these other ones that Officer Yagadar are naming are ones that they were also involved in, and it's a ton more because, as he put it, very well said, Esau is a bloodthirsty beast. That's absolutely true. Now, to put this in perspective, that's something like 12 wars. This country is less than 250 years old. On average, that's a war about every 20 years. You take into account that oftentimes these wars last multiple years. You're having a lot of conflict. You have almost the same amount of conflict when you have peace. Again, because this beast is bloodthirsty. And we're gonna go to Genesis 27 and 40. Let me get over All right. Uh-oh. Messing up. There we go. Actually, we're gonna start at 39. Says, and Isaac, his father. Now, this is right after Esau realized that Jacob had gotten his blessing, so he comes into his father and says, "Well, give me a blessing too." Right. So it says, and Isaac, his father, answered him and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth. Esau is, listen, the fatness of this planet, all the things that are to be carnally enjoyed in this planet, that's what Esau is able to just fill himself with. Again, we say it all the time. This kingdom, this America, allows anyone and everyone to to fully just partake of anything their heart desired, anything their stomach desired, anything their sexual desires ask for. This country allows you to do it, and that's all over the earth. That's pushed. That's what. So Esau's whole perspective is that they need to spread so-called democracy all over the planet. So they spread their wickedness all over the planet. That's their mission. That's what they want to do. That's oftentimes why there's all these conflicts that they're not directly tied to, but they insert themselves in this mission to so-called liberate people. And what you're doing is taking away their culture. You're taking them from their culture and giving them yours. That's what Esau does. All right. It says, in the dew of heaven from above. Verse 40, and by the sword shalt thou live. That's Esau. Esau lives by the sword. And that is why he runs all across this planet, having every war his heart can desire. Every war his heart can desire is what he does. He wants to wage war on any and everything, which is why those movements about the drug epidemic and crime and terrorism, that's why he phrases it the way he does, because that's the way he thinks. Everything is a war. Everything has to be a war because that's his mindset. He lives by the sword. All right. So we're going to get into some of this tonight. So we talked about, let me see, stop sharing that real quick. Oh, that's one other thing I wanted to do. I want to go back to these wars, right? The Indian Wars. Can you all see that date? Kanala, the Indian Wars. Can you all see that the dates that it ran approximately? Okay, no sweat. I'll make this section. There we go. So the Indian Wars were just a time was just a time period where America just waged war on the First Nation brothers and sisters that were already here. That's just what they did. And it ran from approximately 1817 to 1898. That is 81 years. 81 years this country waged war on our First Nation brothers and sisters. Now, what it talks about here, and this is going to be so interesting when we get into some of this stuff. So, as you can see, it says, see if I can highlight that for y'all. I might be able to see it right there. Yep. Total U.S. service members. There was 100,000 service members at the time, right? Battle deaths, 1,000. So what it says, about 1,000 Americans died. Now they're only going to show America's numbers here. This is what is this? This is Department of Veteran Affairs. They're only worried about America's numbers. They're not going to show you how many of the opposing people, especially in the Indian Wars. They'll show you it in some of these other ones, but not in the Indian Wars, and we were going to get to why. All right, but just keep that in mind that the deaths in the battle are about 1,000. All right. One more point. This thing has 1817. We're going to see that that's absolutely wrong. All right. It started so much earlier than that. All right. And we're going to get into that right now. Uh, Now, these are going to probably be small. Y'all probably not going to be able to see them that well. Uh-oh. I'm messing up. That is not what I wanted. All right. Hold on. How is that not available for me? Y'all bear with me. Hold on one second. Whew. All right, Salakia. Y'all bear with me. Can't be too much this evening. All right, here we go. I'll see Rash and Mark in the building. Shalom, Yabashim Shakta. All right, let's see if we can do this. There we go. All right. Again, this may be kind of small, but it's a lot of information there, right? It says because now, Salakia. One more question. We take this back down before we get into it. What was the think about the Indian Wars, right? What was the purpose from the oppressor's perspective, outside of being just a savage beast? What was the stated purpose of these wars? What were they trying to accomplish primarily? Who wants to give it a shot? Right, it said make America great again. Yeah, right. I was Yagadar said world domination. All right, you're on the right track. I don't know if it was the whole world, but think about it at the time. You're talking about the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. They're here, um, but they keep having these conflicts with these First Nation, with our First Nation brothers and sisters. Think about what their goals were. Think about what they wanted to do as an empire, as a kingdom. It's very um, practical from a military perspective. It's not. Um, what else can I tell you? World domination is close. It's just not that large. All right, Sister Al, that's not wrong. My rib said they claimed they wanted to create order. That's not exactly wrong. That was kind of the nonsense. Yeah, that was part of, and that's still part of their that's part of their propaganda. That's what they say when they go across these now. That's what they say when they went to uh, what was it, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. We're trying to liberate the people. We're trying to bring order. We're trying to Saddam Hussein is just terrorizing his people as if this kingdom doesn't terrorize its citizens. Um, but that's part of it. But that I mean that's part of the propaganda. That's not the primary purpose. Think about what the primary purpose was for something like the war on terror. What was the purpose of going over to Saudi Arabia? What were they trying to accomplish? And we're not talking about the propaganda. We're talking about, when you step back and look at it, what were they trying to accomplish? Who wants to give it a shot? I'll give it to you another way. Going all the way back to the 1700s, early 1800s. Think about what changed for America between the late 17, early 1800s, and 100 years later. Okay, I'll take that. Give a sister a hand. Give my brother a hand. Control and dominance for America. Control of. We were almost there. I thought you was almost there. I thought you said something. Control of what? All right, for time's sake, I'm gonna give it to you. What they wanted was land. That's what they wanted. We say it all the time about how they came over here and they stole land. It's exactly what they wanted. That's exactly what the whole purpose was. They wanted to get the land so they could get the resources on the land. They could stretch their empire. That's why when Officer Yagabar said world domination, not quite right then, but definitely the domination of the land. They wanted all of the land that they could get, so that they could control the resources. And again, we see they just became a absolute superpower. All right, so we're gonna get into some of the wars that happened that led to acquiring this land and how they were able to get it. It says because a significant number of Indians, this is our First Nation brothers and sisters, consistently rebuff demands that they cede their lands, meaning give their lands up. Our brothers and sisters like, no, we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that. We're not gonna come in here and just take our land. We're not gonna give it to you. We're not with that, right? It says, and because Americans were determined to acquire them anyway, meaning they listen. We want to buy your land. Maybe we have a deal. Maybe work out something. No, we're not interested in that. Okay, we're going to get it anyway. So let's figure out. I mean, that's what they said. So let's figure out what they did. It says, and because Americans were determined to acquire them anyway, the United States constantly pursued war against Indians. Constantly pursued war against Indians. The next sentence says, indeed, America was born fighting Indians. That's the nature. That's the origination. That's the foundation of this country. War, bloodshed, and stealing of land. And anybody who says anything other than that is an absolute liar. That's the truth. All right. Because in early phases of the Revolutionary War, most Indian nations allied with Great Britain in large measure because they saw a new settler nation as an unprecedented threat to their lands. Same thing that has happened continuously between all the tribes of Israel that are here. We typically align with whoever Esau is having conflict with in hopes that it will alleviate our oppression. Now we know now that that's not how this is done. We have to come back to the law, statutes, and commandments in order to get our oppression or get some relief from our oppression. But that's typically what we do. We've talked about it before between the Civil War. Even when they were in the Civil War, we aligned ourselves with the North. Even the Revolutionary War, we aligned ourselves with the British because our oppressor here, not that they're different, they're the same oppressor, but our oppressor here was so much more wicked from our perspective that we would align with the enemy. Again, not the way to do it, but that's what we always do. All right. Because in 1779, the United States declared war on them. Now, again, this other thing said 1812 is my point. This is 1779. The United States declared war on the, I'm not going to try to pronounce that because I'm going to mess it up, but I do know how to pronounce the Iroquois, to punish them for raids they had undertaken to roll back colonial settlement. The object, in George Washington's words, now this is the so-called founding father, right? A lot of people say he's the greatest man, the greatest president, so on and so forth. The object in George Washington's words was the total destruction and devastation of their settlements. He's talking about so-called Indian, so-called Native Indian. He wanted the total destruction and devastation of their settlements. This is what our brothers and sisters had to deal with. And while we oftentimes, especially in here in the school in ISUPK, we understand the reality of it. But oftentimes, I think not only us, but definitely people who are not in the school, there's a disconnect because we don't see our Native Indian brothers, we don't see our First Nation brothers and sisters like that on a regular basis. And the reason why we don't is for things like that, because this country sought to totally destroy and devastate. And so our brothers are most of them are relegated to reservations and things of that nature, which is just another word for the ghetto. All right. Let's keep going. It says the number of the Iroquois directly killed by the American army was around 200, including some women and children. This is going to be a common theme we're going to hear. Esau does not concern themselves with women or children. And as the scriptures say, matter of fact, Deuteronomy 28 and 50. Let me grab that real quick. Deuteronomy 28 and 50 says, matter of fact, we'll start at 49. It says, the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. We know that eagle is Esau, not only America necessarily, but all of Europe. So many of those European nations have the eagle as their mascot. That is what this is referencing. That is what this is prophesying here. As swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. We don't understand. We did not understand this nation's tongue. This is why our original tongue is Hebrew, which is why we have a Hebrew class that is taught every Friday night, so that we can, as so-called Blacks, Latinos, and First Nation people, can get back to understanding what our language is. All right. Verse 50, it says, a nation of fierce countenance. This countenance means the face. The face of this nation is fierce, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. No one is safe with this wicked bastard. Okay. And that's why, again, you were going to see a recurring theme that that there was a disregard for women and children, and whether there was a all-out battle, whether folks, our brothers and sisters were in retreat, it did not matter. All right, we're gonna get into it though. Says though as many as 1,000 died from disease, primarily dysentery and smallpox, the starvation in refugee camps. Again, the narrative is that it was, there was smallpox and they got diseases because they weren't used to these other people, and they hadn't built up an immune system. I mean, if you're in refugee camps, if you are a prisoner of war, which is what that is, your immune system is going to be down. But it's not necessarily a function of what your immune system, the health of your immune system. It's the conditions that you have these folks in. It's the conditions, and even now, it's again on the border with children in cages. 85,000 children missing. This is Esau. This is what Esau does historically and today. I want him to say it over and over again tonight. Because in some instances, Indians were able to take advantage of their knowledge and the terrain and the vulnerability of U.S. forces to achieve resounding victories, which is kind of cool. I like that. We're going to pop a little collar because they was doing a little something, as much as they could. You know what I mean? They was fighting back. It says in 1791, a force of, I believe you pronounce this as Miamis, I'm not sure, Shawnees, Kickapoos, Weas, Delawares, Potawatomi, that word. Sidebar, you see how much of our Native Indian brothers and sisters uh, affected and still affect just the naming convention. Delaware, Miami, we're going to get into Wisconsin and some other states. These are all things that they named after our First Nation brothers and sisters that they were hell bent on destroying. Wicked. Just devil, Esau, the devil, the Bible speaks of. It said that others launched a surprise attack on the invading U.S. expedition and killed 600 troops, over twice the number that was killed in the better known battle as Little Bighorn. Which again, I'm proud of them brothers. I'm proud of them brothers right there. You got to, applaud them when you can. Because for the most part, though, Indians were unwilling to risk massive casualties. They were especially concerned to protect women and children. So you'll see a contrast here. Where Esau has no concern for women and children, we were predominantly worried about protecting ours. Says, and so generally evacuated their towns, knowing they would be torched. All told, from the late 1770s through 1815, which is when this other one started. The other one, I think it was 1812. Let me check that real quick. 1817. 1817 to 1898. That was the dates that we looked at before. But this says all told between late 1770s through 1815, U.S. forces, including state militias, burned hundreds of Indian towns in New York, Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee, West Virginia, Western Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, and Western Florida. Everywhere. Everywhere. Officer Yagadar says, like when serial killers keep trophies of their victims, reminders for them, right, and warnings to us. Exactly. Khan, get that brother a hand. That's the wickedness. That's the evil in the mind. It's just like when they put up during the so-called civil rights movement when they started putting up Confederate statues and monuments everywhere. Most of those went up in like the 50s as a reminder. Now, what's twisted about that, again, it lets you know how wicked this nation is. That the Civil War, they lost. The South, the Confederacy lost. But yet, when it's time, oh, you want some freedom? You want to be treated fairly? You don't want to be oppressed anymore? Well, let me put these statues up to remind you of your history, to remind you of what we can and continue to do. Diabolical. The press is the worst. The devil the Bible speaks of. Because in most instances, Indians' intelligence gathering systems alerted them to pending attacks, so U.S. forces found towns empty of most inhabitants. Sometimes, however, U.S. forces managed to achieve surprise. When they did, they demonstrated little restraint. They just slaughtered them. They just slaughtered our people because they have no concern. They have no care about the young. They have no care about the old. They have no care about women. They have no care about children. They are absolute, as Officer Yagabar said earlier, bloodthirsty beasts. Sister Ryder said, you can't tell it when you look And all the statues that make you think they are trophies to winners and heroes. Right, right, right. Those trophies, you can't tell. Like if you were somebody who was not aware that there was a civil war or anything like that, you would think all these trophies were for somebody who won. All these statues, well, they must be the victors. All these names and schools and streets and all this stuff, that must have been the folks who won. They love to talk about being on the right side of history. That must be people that were on the right side of history. And to them, it largely is. It largely is, especially in the South. But it largely is in general. I mean, if you the fact that if you think about it, if you have a government and part of your government rebels, why would you wouldn't want to acknowledge that at all, outside of making sure everybody know not to do it again. But that's not what they do. Esau doesn't do that. Esau says it's heritage and it's something to be proud of. Let's keep going. So, so in 1782, a Pennsylvania militia surprised a group of about 100 Christian, so-called Christian Indians. This is one of the first signs that Christianity is of the devil. All right, that's Esau's religion. It's not ours. There's about 100 Christian Indians at, I'm not gonna try to pronounce that either. Nat Hooten, maybe, in eastern Ohio. And a chilling example of what sociologist Michael Mann has termed the dark side of democracy. The militiamen voted on whether or not to kill their captives. When the majority vote was tallied, the militiamen proceeded to slaughter men, women, and children alike. Everybody goes. This is the biggest warmonger on the planet. He lives by the sword. That's all he knows. He he presents himself as a civilized, as civilized and even compassionate. He presents himself that way, and he slaughters everything well. All right. Because in the early 1810s, and again, we're still not to 1817 that the that the vets say. What was this? What was that? The Department of Veteran Affairs. We're still not at 1817. All right. In the early 1810s, the Red Stick Creeks mobilized against American expansion, and Creeks they regarded as collaborating with it. Which, sidebar, I'm gonna give them another hand. And brother said, "Listen, we're not going with this expansion of America, and if you're helping them, then you can go too. We're gonna mobilize against all y'all, and that's to be applauded." Says over the course of several months, the Red Sticks sustained massive casualties, culminating in the loss of at least 800 in 1814, when Andrew Jackson, that is a former president, when Andrew Jackson determining to exterminate them. That's a quote. He was determined to exterminate these brothers and sisters. As he later put it, breached their fortifications at Horseshoe Bend and Tallapoosa River. The event eventually termed a battle, it was called a battle, had some characteristics of a massacre. Though most of the Red Sticks were killed though most of the Red Sticks killed were combatants, between 200 and 300 were shot down while trying to escape by swimming across the Tallapoosa River. Official reports failed to identify them, observing only that the river ran red with blood, but undoubtedly many were women and children. Again, this is a common theme. Our brothers and sisters were absolutely slaughtered. Slaughtered. Says as a general rule, U.S. military operations against Indian communities carry an inherent potential for wholesale violence against combatants and non-combatants, or in the language commonly used at the time, extermination. That was the language that they used at the time. They're just they just out here exterminating people. So-called Indians, so-called Native Indians, so-called Native Americans, First Nation people, our brothers and sisters. Gag. They just exterminated. That was their mission. That was the protocol. That was the effort. That was the purpose. We're just going to exterminate. I just lost my place. Like, so over time, what made U.S. military operations effective was their relentlessness. This is not working. Indians might repulse a single invasion of their country, or if that was impossible, they would abandon the towns and rebuild. But because the United States had a large and growing population, high capacity to continuously mobilize young men to fight, and an unwavering commitment to expansion, the nation was able to wage endless war. Endless war. Again, their Department of Veteran Affairs says it went on for about 81 years. This is showing it went on for over 100 years. They waged endless war on our First Nation brothers and sisters. Right. Oh, Sister Raya said diabolical killers. Exactly. Con. Sister Raya said, growing up in the South, they never taught us this history with such detail. They skim over these moments to make us believe that they are speaking truth. But wow, right. And this is why it becomes so important for us to make sure that we are in these classes, because the history, as time goes on, we get disconnected from it, and that gives them the chance to start changing it, to start whitewashing it, to start talking about, well, it was beneficial to them. Slavery was good for them. Which, by the way, I wish I had that quote. I didn't pull that quote. I didn't think we were going this direction. But by the way, that's the same argument they made back then. Who's familiar with Dred Scott? Kanala. Who's familiar with Dred Scott? Or the Dred Scott case might be a better way to say it. Okay, no sweat. No sweat. Loud, no sweat. All right, so Dred Scott was a he was a slave who I knew I was young and I was going but he was a slave who there was a law at the time, and I'm getting a little off, but there was a law at the time that once free, always free, right? So the idea was if any slave moved to a state where they were free and then moved with their quote unquote master and then moved back to a state where they were now enslaved again, they could petition theoretically and say, well, no, I was free by the law when I was in that state. So once free, always free. There was a precedent that had been set, so on and so forth. I'm giving you the quick version, but this he went back and forth um, in the court systems for I think something like 11 years, suing for his freedom. And not only his freedom, but his wife, I think his children. And um, there was all this back and forth because they didn't want to grant it, so on and so forth. But there's one point where there's a judgment that comes down from the state Supreme Court. It might even be from the actual Supreme Court. I can't remember. But there's a statement where the judge writes how that slavery is beneficial to black people, and that's why we need to stay enslaved. Now, fast forward. Oh boy, DeSantis saying that in Florida. Because again, this stuff doesn't change. It sounds so shocking to us when we hear it, but that's what they think. That's what they thought then when we were still enslaved, and that's what they think now. We're still enslaved, it's just in a different way. And because of that, then it wasn't that bad. It was good for them. It was good for them. All right. That's a complete sidebar. That's not. Um, where was I? Sorry. Right. And they're teaching our youth that. Exactly. Exactly. That's what's going to be taught in schools now. That's what's going to be taught in schools. All type of watered down versions of exactly what happened. And without getting in this class, getting in these history classes and getting this level of detail or doing a ton of research on your own, which our people typically don't do, right? As a whole, we don't do that. We get programmed in school and then we go out into the world, into this wicked kingdom, and whatever happens, happens. And that also makes us softer over time, not understanding, not having a tie to this history. It makes us believe that, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. It makes us believe, well, no, I mean, that doesn't affect me now. We start believing things like, well, nobody I knew was enslaved. That makes us softer. That makes us more apt to join, to stay joined with this wicked oppressor as opposed to separating ourselves, gathering ourselves together as old nation not desired, as the scriptures say. All right. So it's faced with very real, like you're faced with a very real possibility that their people would eventually be destroyed utterly. Leaders of Indian resistance eventually agreed to U.S. treaties requiring land cessions. The threat of genocide is, in this very strong sense of the term, played a crucial role in allowing the United States to achieve its primal goal of taking Indian land. Right. As the sister said, to marry and to trust him, exactly. Because we look at it, we'll look at it like, well, that was a long time ago. Nobody's like that now. You know, people I go to school with, Esau that I go to school with, Esau that I might work with, they seem like they all right. They seem nice enough. And the next thing you know, our guard is down. We're completely weak. And as the scriptures say, we don't follow the laws, statutes, and commandments, so we have no wisdom. And then we start joining with them, and then we get into a worse and worse place. We'll get into a worse and worse place. Nobody gets better because, again, we've gone over information of how There are statistics that are worse now than they were 40, 50 years ago. 40, 50 years ago, we didn't have a drug problem when we were separated. Not like this. 40, 50 years ago, we didn't have Esau policing our neighborhoods. We policed ourselves. We still weren't under the law as we should have been, but we were closer to it than we are now because now we've joined with this nation. Now our brothers think it's a badge of honor to get some money and go get the oppressor's daughter. That's a running joke. Get some money and go get yourself a white girl. As if that's the goal. As if our sisters in the 12 tribes of Israel are not, listen, anything you can absolutely desire, brothers. 12 tribes, we got them in the 12 tribes. I don't even understand. I don't understand. I think I've said it before. Any brother who I hear say they want an oppressor's daughter, I just automatically think they're weak. They're weak. You know, our sisters got some energy. They got some, they got some spunk, if you will. And if you man enough, you'll be able to handle that system. And if you're not, then come into the school so you can get training on how to handle that system. He said, "I'm in C-Town, USA," and that's the first thing I saw. Oh, you saw Jake and she saw. First thing. That's what I'm guessing you mean. Said must be eating food with raisins and cat. Exactly. They eating potato salad with raisins and celery and all type of stuff in it, and cat hair. Yeah, because they walk all across the counter. That's exactly what's happening. Obviously, y'all said brother had the trashiest trailer park I've ever seen. Listen, and that'd be my thing too. We always get the worst ones. Like I don't understand. Like that mentality is so crazy. You would rather have some trashiest, trailer park than to deal with a sister. What's wrong with you? Again, anybody here who sees this, hears this, brother, if that's you, call the school. Call the school, get some training. We'll bring you up. We'll get you straight. We'll get you straight. Because you can't, I mean, good night. Right. Obviously, y'all said well, years ago they would have strung him up while she lied and said it was rape. Right. Right. And that's what people want to act like again. That's another example. We want to act like we didn't see that. That didn't happen because it was so long ago. We get so disconnected from our history. Don't get me wrong, I get it, it's painful. But that's all the more reason why we got to be aware of it. That's all the more reason why we got to come back to the law, statutes, and commandments. All of these things should be motivating us. Even the scriptures say what was written in 4 times written for our learning. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. But that's talking about obviously the Old Testament. But our history matters. We need to know it. It keeps us safe. Save. Oh, they be trying to save him. I think that's what she means. It's just horrible. It's horrible. But yeah, listen, the war that was waged against our First Nation brothers was just about taking their land, and they were relentless at it. Absolutely relentless at it. All right, keep going. Let's see what that one. Okay, so now we bumping up against when the Department of Veteran Affairs said that there was a war against the Indians. This has already been about 40, 50 years, but now we're coming up on it officially. And Rip said they still unaliving our men, but now they use the police force like those two brothers. They tortured for dealing with exactly, exactly. And as we talked about it before, I mean, of course they're using the police force because that's where they originate. That's the police force with the slave patrol. So yeah, and that's another good point. Listen, brothers, stop dealing with Esau because even that is dangerous for you. Even that's dangerous for you. It puts you in that much more danger. You don't think so until six cops break into your house and torture you for 2 hours. You don't think so until she goes in the court and says, "Listen, I know, brother. I mean, I meet this brother. I met him when I was probably my mid 20s. He was 2 or 3 years older than me. I think he had did something like 10 years, maybe 8, either way. Because when he was 19, he was messing with Esau. Her daddy found out. Now, she didn't she didn't claim rape, but he was 19, she was 17. They he got statutory. I think it was something like 8 years at 19 years old. That is devastating to your life. And again, this was not long ago. This is current day. This is not 50, 60 years ago. All right, let's keep going. Because after 1815, the United States intensified its efforts to expand. They were already warned against the brother. They're already burning up different villages. They were relentless. They waged constant war. This is everything that was said. And in 1815, the United States intensified its efforts to expand. To do so, it adopted a policy formally institutionalized through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. I didn't even know that there was an Indian Removal Act at all. Oh, is that right? Okay, so Sister Ryan knows what I'm speaking of. Are you are you talking about the same thing I'm talking about? Or are you guessing? I just want to make sure we're clear because I don't think I realized that. So, Sister Ryan, that they waited for him to turn 19. Was that? Are you guessing? Or are you clarifying the details of the brother? Okay, she says she knows. All right, well, damn. Again, this is the precedent the devil the Bible speaks of. So what she's saying is her parents already knew. They just waited until he turned 19 so they could get him charged. Stop messing with these other nations' daughters. All right. Uh, institutionalized through the Indian Removal Act of 1830, again, which I was not even aware of moving all Indians living east of the Mississippi River to Indian Territory, the modern states of Kansas and Oklahoma. That was Indian Territory at the time. As measured by lives lost, the Indian removal was far more destructive than the early period of war. Consider the three largest Indian nations of the east of the Mississippi: the uh, Choctaws, Creeks, and Cherokees, each with approximately 20,000 people. During the removal process in the 1830s, approximately 2,000 Choctaws, 4,500 Creeks, and 5,000 Cherokees perished, mostly from intersecting factors of disease, starvation, exposure, and demoralization. Disease, starvation, exposure, and demoralization. That is absolute oppression. That's that's internment camps. That's the Holocaust. That's what that is. Many hundreds died during the journey west, though the Trail of Tears metaphor obscures the fact that the majority of deaths occurred in internment camps while awaiting transportation west, and in the first few years after relocation. So again, this was a concerted effort. This wasn't just y'all go. There were internment camps. That's I think it's here. I'm not sure if it's this article or another one I was going to pull. But Officer Yagadar says it often. This is where Hitler got his ideas. These are the type of things that Hitler learned later, like, oh, that's how you do it. He learned from America how to deal with the so-called Jews or so-called Jewish people. He learned on how America dealt with Israelites. That's how he learned how to put those things in place. All right. So the death toll for all three nations, close to 20%, is equivalent to 60 million for the current U.S. population. Imagine 60 million people gone. People were all up in arms about COVID. Imagine 60 million people gone. That's what happened. And that was after the initial war period. That's how they started this off. That's how they kicked this off. This new phase, internment camps, starvation, disease, exposure, demoralization. They broke our brothers and sisters down for some land. To secure Indians' compliance to relocate, the federal government depended on threats. One was the withdrawal of federal protection, thus making Indians subject uh, to state legal regimes that would leave them vulnerable to settler encroachment and eventual dispossession. Which is just I'm just gonna take it like. So the federal government said, look, man, if you don't go on and go, then we're gonna have to leave, and we can't protect you. You're not protecting me anyway. You're telling me to leave. Yeah, but if I leave, then they're gonna take it a different way. Basically, they're saying you can do what I say, or we're gonna let the goons go. This is the government. This is America's government. Horrible. Says U.S. officials also routinely informed Indians that the government would employ violence if they refused to emigrate. I've never seen this word before either. It's pronounced the same, immigrate, but this is what it means to leave. Immigration, as America talks about, is to come over, but this means you leave with an E. Was a threat that invoked an earlier history of war. Because again, we just talked about all the war that they had. We just talked about all the communities that they destroyed. We just talked about all the villages that they burned down. And so the federal government is saying, look, man, I'm going to have to let the goons in. You know what? I'm going to do it myself. This is relocating. This is what this wicked kingdom does. Because when Indians did refuse, officials made good on their word, authorizing war. Telling you, this is the biggest warmonger on the planet. Authorizing war against the Sox and Foxes in the Black Hawk War in 1832. That's part of this Indian War period. And Seminoles and the Second Seminole War in 1840, so like 1836 through 1842. In the first instance, meaning the Black Hawk War, an American Indian had the opportunity to employ unrestrained violence. Salakia. An American army had the opportunity to employ unrestrained violence when troops assisted by the Ho Chunk auxiliaries intercepted the Black Hawks band as they attempted to cross the Mississippi River through southern Wisconsin. The Americans fired indiscriminately, unaliving well over 200 Indians, including non-combatants. What does non-combatants mean? Women and children. Anybody who wasn't fighting. Anybody who was too old to fight. Anyone who was too young to fight. Anyone who may have had an injury so they couldn't fight. Everybody had to go. That's what they did. It wasn't just about the battle. It was about slaughter. Because in Florida, and it's just referencing the Seminole, the Second Seminole War. It says in Florida, where the terrain and climate were unfavorable for military operations, the Army had a much more difficult time finding, let alone surprising, Seminole settlements, and so resorted to tactics such as seizing Seminoles during peace negotiations and sending them to prison. Wow. Exodus, not Exodus, Ecclesiasticus, I believe it is 12 and 10. Like, no, that's not the one. Hold on, I'm gonna get that one. There it is. Psalms 55 and 21. Psalms 55 and 21 says, the words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. This says, let me get back to it. It says, because they could not surprise them with war and attacks, it says, they resorted to tactics such as seizing Seminoles during peace negotiations and sending them to prison. Their words are smooth as butter, but war is in their heart. You tell somebody, hey, listen, why don't you come to the table, man? We're gonna talk, we're gonna work this thing out. We're gonna figure this out. You got your side, I got mine. Let's just see where we can come to some common ground and so on and so forth. Those are peace negotiations. Peace negotiations are, look, man, we don't want anybody else to die. We don't want anybody else, we don't want any prisoners of war. We just want peace. We want to just work this thing out, figure out, like I said, where our common ground is. We're gonna find some understanding. And as soon as they get to the table, they arrest them and throw them in prison. This is what the Bible is telling us. Now, Ecclesiastes 12 and 10, it's like Ecclesiasticus 12 and 10, says, never trust thine enemy, for like as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness. When iron rusts, it rusts. It's a process, and you don't get that off easily. It destroys it. It consumes it. His wickedness consumes him. Don't trust our enemy. But again, not having these connections to our history, not having this understanding, we'll think some of them are, some of them okay. Never trust thine enemy because his words are smooth as butter, but war is in his heart. All right, let's keep going. It says, although no major massacre occurred during the Second Seminole War, military officers frequently called for the extermination of Seminoles. And so the absence of massacre was not due to the lack of disposition, but the absence of opportunity. They just couldn't figure out how to get them. They couldn't deal with the land. They couldn't deal with the terrain. They couldn't surprise them. They just couldn't get the opportunity to do it. But they absolutely were going to. They absolutely wanted to. That was the goal. They just didn't have the chance. Like other Indians in similar circumstances, Seminoles were often able to evade U.S. troops and occasionally inflict casualties on them. And again, go ahead, Israel. The scholars have begun referring to Indian removal as ethnic cleansing, a term whose aptness seems incontestable. That's what it was. They wanted to absolutely destroy our brothers and sisters. That was the goal, to destroy them and to take their land. Okay, and that might have been all I had on this. Yes. All right. Now we're going to shift gears slightly. Shift gears slightly. Let me see. I don't know how much of this we're going to get into. If not, we're going to get into some more of it later. So, question. Kanala'a, who is familiar with Virginia's 1924 Racial Integrity Act? Who has ever heard of that? And if you have heard of it, can you tell me what the gist of it? All right. I know sweat. I know sweat. Uh-oh. All right. I love my brother, but listen, I didn't think I was gonna get Officer Yagadar. Go ahead. Officer Yagadar don't know. I must be bringing out something. Heck, I'm just joking. Salaki, Salaki, no sweat. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it. All right. Let me ask this: who's heard of the one drop rule? Who's heard of the one drop rule? right, Sister ISUPK. Okay. All right, obviously y'all got that. At least I heard that one. All right, Sister Coco said, all right, no sweat. Sister I gave you a quick breakdown. The one drop rule was when Esau established that if you had anybody in your ancestry that was black, then you were black in their mind. All right, we know that is absolutely not the case, and we're gonna get into some of this stuff that is so ironic for them. But that like Virginia's 1924 Racial Integrity Act actually is in that same space as the one drop rule, in an attempt to make all these definitions for uh, who's so-called black and who's not. And obviously, we know in here you are what your father is. It makes it very simple. It doesn't have to be. Uh, well, you'll see. You'll see. There it is. All right. Says the one drop concept evolved along with the rise of quote unquote science and eugenics and the idea of racial purity. The eugenics quote unquote science again is what uh, Hitler used. That was a big basis of his whole argument and movement. All right. Again, that was something that America adopted first. Because although the eugenics movement began with the presumption of bettering the so-called human species, in the U.S. it quickly devolved into a way for middle and upper class white racists to claim supremacy over those they deemed inferior. Because the whole eugenics thing was about the purity of a race and humans and how they can be better and blah 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 blah. So if you want to make the argument that um, that you are the quote unquote pure race, then you have to make the argument that all others are inferior. All right. Since proponents provided dubious. Now listen to this. Proponents provided dubious statistics to prove that non-white and mixed blood people committed more crimes and had lower scores on the intelligence test due to their inferiority, due to their inferior heredity, and they prepared to turn the skewed data they collected into laws to keep races separate and make it very difficult to be considered white and much easier to be considered colored. Now, the whole being considered white thing, being considered colored, I'm really not concerned about. But what I want y'all to catch is they provided dubious statistics to prove that non-white and mixed blood people committed more crimes and had lower scores on intelligence tests due to their inferior heredity. This is not something new. So Cracker could lose his white privilege if he got a blood transfusion. Right, right. Yeah, that's a very good point. That is a very good point. If you get a drop in you, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. I hadn't even thought about that. I don't think they were doing blood transfusions back then. They just cut your leg off or something. I don't know. I can't speak on that specifically. But think about this. They provided dubious statistics to make it seem like we were less intelligent and committed more crimes. That's the exact same thing they do today. That's the exact same method. That's the exact same uh, uh, um, argument. It's the exact same propaganda. This stuff is not. It's no different. They have their method, and they play their playbook. This is in the 1920s. This was literally 100 years ago, and they're having the same type of conversations and making the same type of arguments today. That black people commit more crimes and we're less intelligent and so on and so forth. Now, mind you, they don't want to talk about why we're in the position that we're in, why our communities are so impoverished, all the oppression that led up to all of the ghettos. And we have to be mindful to know that we joined with this oppression, which is also part of it, and that we were in a better position when we were by ourselves. And even then, they wouldn't leave us alone, but we were in a better position when we were by ourselves. And this is an example of why, because when we join to them, they make sure that we're on the bottom. All right, let's keep going. It says in 1875, a landmark Virginia law had defined a mixed race, so-called mixed race, or mulatto person as a person with at least one-fourth equivalent, one-fourth or the equivalent of one grandparent, Negro blood. In 1866, legislators replaced the word mulatto with colored, because of course we got all these names. Again, we're our byword. We have been Negro, we've been nigger, we've been color, we've been Afro American, we've been African American, thugs. They use that too. We've been everything under the sun. Black, it's everything. Again, that is an absolute prophecy. I say this same law also defined as Indian any person who was not colored but had one-fourth or more Indian blood. In 1910, the legislature uh, more tightly defined, more tightly redefined a Negro as one who had one-sixth or more of Negro blood. So again, it's going further and further, right? And again, this is so backwards because, as we'll see, I think it was this article. I mean, some of this stuff would just have been. Oh, it was this article because we're gonna get into it. I ain't gonna give it away yet. All right. Whereas the General Assembly had defined colored in 1910 as someone with one-sixth or more Negro blood, Plecker, did I get into Plecker? I don't think I got into Plecker. I'm gonna give y'all a little bit of this. I got another article where I get a little more into it. But in 1912, Dr. Walter Plecker arrived on the scene in Virginia. Plecker, a white supremacist, became the register of the Bureau of Vital Statistics. Before I go on, who knows what the Bureau of Vital Statistics is? Kanala. It has a slightly different name today, um, but you may still be aware. Kanala. Census, la says, not census, not census. Sister I says she knows. So the Bureau of Vital Statistics, I think it's called the Bureau of Vital Records, maybe today. It's basically just where you go to get right. Sister I said it. Give her a hand. So you go get a copy of your birth certificate. I want to say you might go there for no, you go to courthouse for marriage license, but definitely your birth certificate. Copy of birth certificate. That's where they keep it. They keep other records and stuff. All right. So he became in 1912 the registrar of the Bureau of Vital Statistics. All right. But he was an absolute racist. So we're gonna get into this a little bit. How much time we got left? All right. It says, whereas the The General Assembly had defined colored in 1910 as someone with one-sixth or more Negro blood. Plecker personally considered a person with even a trace of Negro blood, again, we get into the one-drop rule, to be colored. Plecker extended his definition to most Virginia Indians because he believed they had inbred with blacks. Even that term inbred. Oppressor, the devil, the Bible speaks. Now, I think this is a picture of that. I ain't gonna put them up there. It says in 1924, Plecker wrote two races. Now listen to this irony: two races as materially divergent as the so-called white and so-called Negro in morals, mental powers, and cultural fitness cannot live in close contact without injury to the higher. Now, who is he saying is going to be injured in this situation? Who is the higher that he's referencing? Who is the higher? I'm going to read it again. He wrote in 1924, two races as materially divergent as the white and Negro in morals, mental powers, and cultural fitness cannot live in close contact without injury to the higher. Who is the higher that he's talking about? Who's the higher that was going to be injured if they live in close contact? I see you, Officer Yakida. I just want to walk you, not you, but I want to walk it down. You jump there. You know what? It's all good. The higher they talk about is this Plecker is saying that Esau is going to be injured if we live close in close proximity. But as Officer Yagadar so eloquently said, Negroes going to get hurt. Oh no, Salakia, I misread what you said. When he said without causing injury to the higher, he meant Esau was going to be the one injured. Right. Right. He's saying that Esau is going to be the one hurt if we live in close proximity, if we live in close contact. His argument was we can't live together because we're as Esau, we're going to be hurt. Now, who gets hurt when we live in close proximity? Who's been hurt by us joining? Who's been hurt by us joining ourselves to this nation? Who's been completely destroyed? It's not Esau. It's absolutely not Esau. As Officer Yagadar said, look, as much as they rob, unalive, and destroy, you worried about yourself? And mind you, this is a short period after we supposedly were emancipated. This ain't even that long after the Emancipation Proclamation. And, you're talking about 40, 50 years, 40 years. And now you're worried about your safety in Virginia? Give Officer Young a hand. They got a trillion. That schoolboy said trillion. All I say one because of the Montgomery bro. At best. But you worried about your safety when literally for the next 100 years you destroyed so-called blacks, Latinos, and First Nation people. The two races are as materially divergent as whites and Negroes in morals, mental powers, and cultural fitness cannot live in close contact without injury to the higher. Terrible. So when the Virginia legislature passed the Racial Integrity Act in 1924, it flipped the legal definition of races to focus on whites. So because up until this point, everything was about defining what anybody who wasn't white was. So that's why it's the whole of one drop and 1/4 and 1/6 if you're Native Indian and all this stuff, right? But up until this point, okay, now we're going to define it as far as whites is concerned. It says the law defines whites as anyone who has no trace whatsoever, not one drop of any blood other than Caucasian. This is the legislation of the one drop rule. And these are the type of things again we gotta know because I'd heard of it, but I thought that was something that was, just said. I didn't think there was a law that supported it. I shouldn't be surprised. And I'm really not, but I just didn't realize it. And that's again what we have to know the history of our people and what things we dealt with. Now here, you can see it, yep. It says within a few decades, Germany's Adolf Hitler adopted the same reasoning when trying to create a pure so-called Aryan master race, ultimately leading to his own extreme final solution. Adolf Hitler learned from America. Adolf Hitler learned from America how to oppress people, how to destroy people, how to unalive mass people at a time. He completely learned this from our oppressor here. Now, that's not that surprising because they're all the same people anyway. They're all Esau. Um, okay, so this is just something I found interesting. We probably gonna get ready to wrap it up um, after this. And it says Walter. I'm gonna start at the beginning of the paragraph. It says Walter Plecker served as a state registrar until 1946. During and after his years in the Bureau, Plecker and other segregationists encouraged racial purity by creating separate public facilities and schools, forcing the other, quote unquote, other into menial jobs and forbidding interracial marriage. Now we know some of that's not bad. All right. We are not supposed to marry these other nations. We are supposed to stay within our family. And again, brothers, sisters, there anything that you are attracted to physically, you can find it in the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, damn, let's just be real. All right. It says the decision made by the U.S. Supreme Court in the now familiar case of Loving versus Virginia. Who's ever heard of this? This is in 1967. Kanala'a. I had not. Kanala'a. Who's heard of it? In 1967, finally invalidated and declared unconstitutional any laws forbidding interracial, um, inter, forbidding intermarriage of the races, including the section of Virginia's 1924 uh, Racial Integrity Act. Meaning they just pulled that back. Now, this is the interesting piece. It says finding that such laws contrary to the guarantees of equal protection under the Fourth Amendment. That's true movie they made some years back. Okay, no sweat. So now this is interesting, right? This allowed this allowed so-called interracial marriage because before it had been illegal. So the reasoning though is that it said it found that the act and such laws, if they found it contrary to the guarantees of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Right. So you got a couple that wanted to get married and they couldn't. Which one you think was Esau? Who wants to give it a guess? Because this was the Lovings. They were a couple. Which one you? Which if it, yeah, obviously, y'all, now you may know because I didn't even know there was a movie out about this man. But even if you didn't know, even if you've never heard of it, think about how this is worded. Which one of them do you think was Esau? The man or the woman? Who wants to give it a shot? You got a 50-50 chance. Was the man or the woman Esau? And if you could give me your thought pattern on why. Right, you're not wrong. Officer Yakadana is absolutely accurate. Officer Yakadana said a man, of course, he cuffed up his bed with. That's absolutely accurate. But what I was getting at was they found that the law was contrary to the guarantees of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. So clearly, there you go. My Rib said, man, okay. Rib Officer Yakadana building, she know she said the man exactly. Because clearly, only Esau is going to have the court talk about his Fourth Amendment rights in what is this? What was that? 1967. Ain't nobody talking about 14th Amendment rights in 1967 about anybody of color. Nobody of Israel. But he can go and make a case that I deserve to marry my bed wench because I want to, and y'all are stepping on my rights. This is the most wicked beast of the field, the most subtle beast of the field, and we need to make sure we stay aware of it. All right. And with that, if there are any questions? If there are any questions, y'all can put them in the chat before I read these security announcements. Slovakia. Slovakia. Maybe I did not. If I did not say rib officer Yagadar, Slovakia. Slovakia says if I didn't say that correctly. I just got a text message, so I believe I owe you an apology. Sis, my fault. All right. All right, I'm going with these. Some questions, so we're gonna go with the security announcements. We're the Israelite, Slovakia. We're the ISUPK, started out of 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commanding General Yohana. Rule for new brothers and sisters. When a new brother or sister comes into the school, they are off limits for 6 months. They are to be saluted only. They are here to share themselves with the world. If they need transportation, uh, the teacher will, Salaki, the camp leader will arrange it. After 6 months, if a brother or sister has an interest in a particular person, he or she must get permission from the head to speak to the brother or sister. There's another 6 months in which the brother and sister will court each other. After this 6 month period, the brother and sister will get permission from the camp leader to marry. Tithe, which is a commandment. You can find it in Numbers 18 and 21 on Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. It means tenth in the Hebrew is ma'ashara. 10% of every penny of any increase that the Lord gives you. You can give it to the Treasury Department, or you can also go to ISUPK.com and it's like you pay your tithes through PayPal directly there. You have your records if you do. All right. Priest fund is a free will offering for priests. It's not mandatory whatsoever amount you would like to give. Upcoming holy convocation and high holy days. We have the memorial blowing the trumpets on September 15th. And I believe we're going to have that in the school in Newport News. So more to come on that. Let's see. And if any brother wants to become a trooper in the school, he needs to start wearing all black. That's black boots, shirts, pants, headband, and war scarf. Make sure you get in contact with Officer Yarash. It's like Officer Yarash Ahmad or Captain Dr. Shah to make sure they know if that's what you want to do. All right. And with that, I'm going to say Shalom, Yahweh Shem Thumb to the brothers, Yahweh Shema, I was done by Shem Shah to the sisters. Shalom, Israel.